They called it a quarterly update meeting. That's what showed up on my Outlook calendar anyway. Just another Wednesday morning gathering in Meridian Technologies' glass conference room, complete with overpriced coffee and the usual corporate theater. I'm Tom Anderson, 58 years old, and I've been building security systems for this company longer than most of these people have been writing code. But the moment I walked in, something felt wrong. 2 cameras were set up in the back, pointing straight at the podium. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and everyone stops talking? This was worse. Patricia Richardson, our CEO, stood there in her power suit, looking like she was about to deliver the performance of her life. Patty's always been a showboat, but this felt different, more final. I took my usual seat in the 3rd row, same spot I'd occupied for the past 5 years since they moved me out of my basement lab. Around me, engineers and project managers shuffled in with their notepads, most of them young enough to be my kids. Hell, Ryan, my 17-year-old son, probably knows more about their programming languages than I do these days. But they don't know what I know about keeping systems secure. At 58, you start thinking about things differently, like how I've got maybe 7 years left before retirement, assuming my 401k doesn't tank again. The mortgage on the house still has 8 years to go, $2,400 a month. That doesn't care how old I am. And Ryan's MIT acceptance letter is sitting on my kitchen table with a price tag of $55,000 per year. That's $220,000 total, money I promised him he wouldn't have to borrow. Patty cleared her throat, and the room went quiet. After careful consideration, she began, her voice carrying that practiced corporate tone. We've determined that Thomas Anderson is no longer aligned with Meridian's future direction. It took a second for my name to register. The coffee in my stomach turned to acid. She wasn't looking at me. She was performing for the cameras, for the board members watching the live stream, for the investors who'd been breathing down her neck about the upcoming $950 million merger with Pinnacle Capital. 32 years of work. 32 years of late nights, weekend calls, and systems that never failed on my watch. Reduced to one sentence delivered into a microphone for public consumption. You know what really gets me? I'd seen this coming. The writing was on the wall when they started hiring all these 25-year-old hotshots with their computer science degrees and their talk about agile methodology and disruptive innovation. They looked at guys like me and saw dead weight. I sat there, back straight, keeping my face neutral. Around me, a few people started that awkward courtesy clapping you do when you're not sure what's appropriate. Others stared at their shoes, uncomfortable with the spectacle. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down. Here's what Patty and her executive team didn't understand about the system I'd built for them. It wasn't just some standard corporate security setup you could replace with an off-the-shelf solution. Over the past 15 years, I designed a 4-layer verification framework that protected every major contract Meridian signed. Layer 1 handled basic authentication, usernames, passwords, the basic stuff. Layer 2 managed legal compliance, making sure every signature was from someone authorized to sign. Layer 3 verified financial authorization, checking that the dollar amounts matched approved budgets. And Layer 4, my personal edition, included quantum encrypted blockchain verification that only I could authorize. I'd learned this approach during my 12 years with Northrop Grumman, working on defense contracts where one mistake could cost millions or compromise national security. When Meridian started landing government deals, I made sure we had the same level of protection. Every contract, every merger document, every major agreement had to pass through all 4 layers. Remove any layer, and the whole system would lock down until the issue was resolved. Patty had no idea she'd just fired the one person who could complete her precious merger. After the meeting, I walked to my desk like I was just grabbing lunch. My workspace looked exactly the same, organized, methodical, everything in its place. The same coffee-stained mouse pad I'd been using for 8 years. The same photo of my Chevy Silverado from the company parking lot picnic. And on the corner sat a photo of Ryan at his high school graduation, holding up his acceptance letter to MIT, kids brilliant with computers, way beyond anything I ever understood. The photo reminded me why I'd worked so hard, why every late night and weekend call had been worth it. Jim Walsh, our head of security, appeared beside my desk. He's a good guy. Someone I'd personally recommended for the job 8 years ago when he was just a young father trying to provide for his family. Now he had the uncomfortable job of escorting me out. "Tom, I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. "This isn't right. They're making a huge mistake." I nodded. Just do your job, Jim. You've got a family to think about. Mortgage payments don't care about principals. We walked toward the exit together, past colleagues who suddenly found their keyboards fascinating. A few met my eyes with apologetic looks, but most avoided eye contact entirely. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the too-quiet office. At my age, you realize how few real friends you have at work. Most relationships are just convenience, people being polite because they have to see you every day. At the glass doors, Jim paused before scanning his badge. "They don't deserve what you built for them," he said. "Take care of yourself, Jim," I replied, keeping my voice steady. The doors opened with their familiar mechanical hiss. Cool air rushed in from the parking lot, carrying the smell of car exhaust and the promise of a life I hadn't planned for. I stepped through without looking back. What I carried with me was heavier than any briefcase, the knowledge that Meridian's entire merger depended on systems I'd built, layer by careful layer. That evening, I sat in my apartment, the familiar quiet settling around me like an old jacket. Ryan was at study group, preparing for his MIT interviews. The kid had no idea his old man had just become unemployed. At 58, getting fired isn't like being 30 and bouncing back. Companies see your resume and think liability health insurance costs, training someone who might retire in 10 years, dealing with a guy who remembers when things were done differently. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the city move on without any awareness of what had just happened at Meridian Technologies. My phone sat silent on the table. No calls, no messages, no emergency alerts from the system. But I knew it was only a matter of time. 3 days. That's how long it took for Patty's confidence to crack. I was finishing my morning coffee, thinking about updating my LinkedIn profile and wondering if anyone would hire a 58-year-old systems engineer when my phone buzzed. Meridian's executive line. Patty herself was calling, probably from her corner office with the city view she loved to show off during board meetings. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I set the phone down and watched it vibrate against the kitchen table like an angry insect. The irony hit me 3 days ago. She'd treated me like dead weight in front of the entire company. Now, in her panic, I was suddenly essential again. When the call finally dropped to voicemail, I waited a minute before pressing play. Her voice came through the speaker, but it wasn't the commanding tone she'd used on stage. This was raw, desperate, breaking at the edges. "Tom, pick up, please. We've got a situation here. The merger documents won't clear without your authorization code. Legal's breathing down my neck, and Pinnacle's executives are asking questions every hour. I need you to call me back. We can work something out. Just call me. Work something out." That was Patty's language for when the walls were closing in. She never begged until the leverage shifted completely out of her favor. I deleted the voicemail and went back to my coffee. Outside, delivery trucks rumbled past, dogs barked, and life carried on. For the first time in 32 years, corporate chaos wasn't my problem to solve. The calls kept coming. First from Patty, then from Amanda Foster at the law firm handling the merger. Amanda and I had worked together on dozens of contracts over the years. She was sharp, professional, usually respectful. But when I finally answered her call on the second day, desperation had made her forget our history. "Tom, this is just a formality," she said, her voice strained but trying to sound casual. "We need your digital signature to finalize the documents. Nothing complicated, just routine authorization. You know how these systems work. Formality. The same word Patty had used when she announced my firing. Just a formality, she'd said, like 32 years of service was nothing more than paperwork to be filed away. "Amanda," I said, keeping my tone level, "I know better than anyone what's at stake here. I built the framework your contracts are trapped inside. I know exactly why the system is frozen, and it's not a formality." Silence stretched between us. The kind lawyers hate silence that means control is slipping away from them. "Surely you understand the risk of letting this collapse," she said carefully. "The jobs at stake, the shareholders, the economic impact." I almost laughed. Where had their concern been when Patty paraded my dismissal like a trophy? Where had it been during all those late nights when I worked alone to keep their deals from falling apart? And where was their concern about my job, my mortgage, my son's college fund? "I won't be signing anything," I said. "Not today, not ever. You want to talk about jobs at stake? I just lost mine after 32 years. Good luck figuring out your authorization problem." The next morning brought news that Meridian's stock had dropped 12 points overnight. The financial networks were calling it a procedural delay, but markets don't lie. When confidence falters, numbers fall. The system I'd built was speaking louder than any press release Patty could issue. Then came the anonymous message. I found it in my personal email that evening, the subject line blank, sender address routed through multiple relays. The body contained one line: "They need you more than they think. The other side knows it too." ARAR could be Alex Rivera from IT, someone who'd always understood the technical side of what I'd built. The message was followed by another the next day. "Patty doesn't hold the key. You do. Pinnacle Capital knows it. Check the business news." That hit me like cold water. I pulled up the financial websites on my laptop. Buried in the merger coverage was a quote from an unnamed Pinnacle executive. "Certain technical authorizations remain outstanding. We're evaluating all options." They weren't fooled by Patty's performance. They recognized that I, not her board or her lawyers, was the real gatekeeper. The $950 million merger depended on authorization that only I could provide. And I was sitting in my kitchen in sweatpants, unemployed, with no intention of helping any of them. By the end of the week, the whispers had become headlines. Meridian's stock continued sliding as investors realized the routine delay was anything but routine. The merger documents remained unsigned, frozen in a system that wouldn't bend to pressure or legal maneuvering. I watched it unfold from my living room, financial news playing in the background while I sorted through job listings. At my age, most postings might as well say, "No one over 40 need apply." They use code words digital native, startup mentality, high energy environment. Translation: we want someone young who will work 80-hour weeks for peanuts. The unemployment benefits would kick in next week, $420 per week, which barely covers groceries. Thank God I'd been putting extra toward the mortgage principal. Still, doing the math was sobering. My savings could cover about 8 months of expenses if I cut everything to the bone. After that, I'd be looking at borrowing against my 401k or selling the house. That's when Patty made her biggest mistake. Desperate to salvage the situation, she announced that her legal team had found a technical workaround that would bypass the authorization requirements. She stood behind the same podium where she'd fired me, promising investors that full clearance would happen within 24 hours. I watched the press conference from my kitchen table, laptop open, eating a peanut butter sandwich because I was already cutting back on expenses. Patty looked confident, even triumphant, as she assured the cameras that the merger was back on track. The stock ticked upward slightly, not much, but enough for desperate investors to cling to hope. She had no idea what was coming. You see, when I built that system, I didn't just create verification layers. I built in something else, a learning algorithm that would recognize and flag any attempt to circumvent the authorization process. Call it professional paranoia, but after 12 years working defense contracts, you learn to assume someone's always trying to hack your work. The next day, reports started trickling out on the financial websites. Meridian's legal team had attempted to input their bypass code into the merger platform. At first, everything seemed fine. Documents loaded, systems appeared to accept the input. For a few hours, Patty and her board probably celebrated, convinced they'd pulled off a rescue. But then, the failsafe triggered. Every unauthorized signature, every false credential was detected and flagged. The system didn't just reject the attempt, it cascaded through every copy of the files, freezing them permanently and rendering all versions invalid. The entire contract, in every iteration, was dead. I pictured the scene. Lawyers staring at screens full of red warning messages, IT staff scrambling to understand what had gone wrong, board members watching their $950 million deal evaporate in real time, and Patty finally understanding that her performance had just crashed into an immovable wall. The stock plummeted again, erasing the brief bump and then some. News outlets that had praised her innovative solution that morning pivoted sharply by evening, highlighting the complete collapse with merciless detail. My phone started buzzing with texts from former colleagues. "Tom, did you do this?" one asked. Another, "They're saying it's a security feature you built. Is that true?" I didn't respond. Let them figure it out themselves. That evening, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. New. York area code Pinnacle Capital's headquarters. "Mr. Anderson," the voice was calm, measured, nothing like the desperation I'd been hearing from Meridian. "This is Brian Matthews, COO at Pinnacle Capital." I waited, curious to hear what the other side had to say. "I'll be direct," he continued. The contract cannot proceed without your authorization. Our technical team has confirmed that without your signature, the entire agreement is invalid. Our board has suspended all forward activities indefinitely. The honesty was refreshing. No threats, no manipulation, just recognition of reality. They underestimated you, Matthews said quietly. Meridian, I mean. They treated you like overhead when you're actually the cornerstone. We've been watching this situation develop, and frankly, we're impressed by the elegance of your security architecture. I found myself leaning forward. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying we recognize talent when we see it. And we recognize that Meridian just made the biggest personnel mistake in corporate history. The conversation that followed changed everything. Matthews explained that Pinnacle had been evaluating not just Meridian's financials, but their technical infrastructure. My security system was one of the main assets they'd wanted to acquire. Without it, and without me, the merger made no sense. We're prepared to make you an offer, he said. Chief Technology Officer, $280,000 base salary, full benefits, and equity options. You'd be building security systems for a company that actually understands their value. I sat there in my kitchen, unemployed for 2 weeks, looking at unemployment forms and job listings that basically told me I was too old to matter. And here was a $280,000 offer to do exactly what I'd been doing, except for people who appreciated it. There's one condition, Matthews added. We need to know that the Meridian situation is permanently resolved, that there's no chance of reconciliation. I thought about Patty's desperate phone calls, about 32 years of being taken for granted, about being fired on camera like some kind of corporate entertainment. Mr. Matthews, I said, that bridge isn't just burned, it's ash. 2 days later, federal agents were executing search warrants at Meridian's offices. It turned out the merger collapse had triggered something bigger, a federal investigation into financial irregularities that my security system had been flagging for months. The same system designed to protect legitimate contracts was now exposing illegitimate ones. Agent Sarah Collins from the FBI Financial Crimes Division called me the next morning. Professional, direct, asking technical questions about the security framework and how it might have been compromised. I met her at a downtown coffee shop. Nothing dramatic, just two people talking over mediocre coffee and stale pastries. We're seeing patterns that suggest systematic contract manipulation, she said, sliding a tablet across the table. Payments to shell companies, backdated authorizations, routing through offshore accounts. Your system flagged all of it over the past 18 months. The irony was perfect. Patty had fired me for refusing to compromise the system's integrity. Now that same integrity was exposing her crimes. The security architecture I'd built wasn't just protecting legitimate contracts, it was creating an evidence trail of illegitimate ones. We'd like you to consult on the technical analysis, Collins continued. Help us understand what the system detected and when. The pay is $180 per hour, and given the complexity of this case, we're looking at several months of work. At $180 an hour, working even part-time would more than cover my expenses while I figured out the Pinnacle offer. Better yet, the work felt meaningful using my skills to expose corruption instead of enabling it. One more thing, Collins said as she packed up her tablet. This investigation is going to get a lot bigger. We're talking money laundering, defense contract fraud, possibly more. Meridian's going to be front-page news, and not in a good way. Within 2 weeks, federal agents were executing search warrants at Meridian's offices. Computers seized, files impounded, executives lawyering up. The $950 million merger became the least of Patty's problems as money laundering and fraud charges materialized. The business news coverage was brutal defense contractor under federal investigation, CEO facing fraud charges, merger collapse triggers, criminal probe. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was the guy who'd built the system that caught them. Every news article mentioned the sophisticated security architecture that had detected the irregularities. They didn't use my name, but everyone in the industry knew who'd designed Meridian's systems. That's when other companies started calling. Not just Pinnacle, but their competitors too. Word spreads fast in the defense contractor world, especially when someone builds something that actually works. By the end of the month, I had 3 job offers, all north of $250,000, all from companies that suddenly understood the value of uncompromised security systems. Ryan was in the kitchen doing calculus homework when I accepted Pinnacle's offer. The kid looked up from his textbook when I hung up the phone. "Good news?" he asked. "Very good news, son. Looks like your MIT tuition just got a lot easier to handle." His grin was worth everything I'd been through. 4 months earlier, I'd been worried about paying for his education. Now I was looking at a salary that would cover tuition, eliminate the mortgage, and maybe even let me think about retiring comfortably instead of working until I dropped. "Dad, you're actually smiling," Ryan said. "I haven't seen you do that since Mom died." That hit me harder than I expected. My wife Sarah had passed 3 years ago from cancer, and since then, work had been my escape. Maybe getting fired was the push I needed to remember what actually mattered. The final chapter came 6 months later. Patty was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for money laundering and defense contract fraud. The judge specifically mentioned how the security system had provided irrefutable evidence of systematic financial crimes. Meridian Technologies filed for bankruptcy. Its assets sold off to pay creditors and legal fees. The employees who'd sat in silence during my humiliation were scattered to new jobs, many struggling to explain the gap in their resumes when potential employers asked about the federal investigation. Jim Walsh landed on his feet. I'd recommended him to Pinnacle's security team, and he was doing well. But a lot of others weren't so lucky. But I wasn't thinking about revenge as I sat in my new office at Pinnacle, designing security systems that actually protected what they were supposed to protect. The work was challenging, the team respected experience over youth, and nobody questioned whether a 58-year-old engineer could keep up with technology. They cared about results, not age. Ryan started his freshman year at MIT that fall, debt-free and proud of his old man. When his friends asked what I did for work, he'd tell them I built systems that couldn't be broken or bypassed. "My dad's like a digital locksmith," he'd say. But for the good guys. The house was paid off by Christmas. The 401k was back on track. And for the first time since Sarah died, I was thinking about the future instead of just surviving day to day. Pinnacle had already mentioned promotion opportunities, maybe running the entire cybersecurity division in a few years. That evening, I deleted the last voicemail from Patty's final desperate call. I didn't need to hear it again. The silence that followed said everything I needed to know about how that chapter of my life had ended. Sometimes the best revenge is simply building something so solid that the truth has no choice but to rise to the surface. And sometimes, just sometimes, the system works exactly the way it should. When companies value loyalty and experience, when hard work gets recognized, when doing the right thing actually pays off, that's when you know you've found where you belong. You know what I learned? At 58, getting fired isn't the end of your career. Sometimes it's the beginning of the one you should have had all along.